January 11th, 2009. As the holiday hustle fades, citizens of Jacksonville are looking forward to a new year on Florida's eastern coastline.
Jacksonville is a big city with a small town feel. One of the really cool things about living here is a lot of people know each other.
We have a pretty thriving downtown, a lot of entertainment in the city center.
It's a place where you feel the love, you feel, the excitement.
But at 3 p.m., 56-year-old Janice Stubbs is starting to panic.
Jacksonville 911, Hodges.
Yes, I need to get an officer.
She calls the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office to report her daughter, Danielle Stubbs, missing.
Danielle had made plans to go with her mother to actually go shopping.
I was sitting at home and I was waiting for her to call me, and she never called. And I'm like, what in the world is going on?
When's the last time you saw her?
Yesterday at 4 o'clock.
So all day long, I'm worried. And I call her phone. She never answered the phone, nothing.
Is it out of character for her to go missing?
It's very out of character.
I'm going to send a police officer out to you.
Danielle's mother tells police that she and her family are going to wait at Danielle's townhouse until officers arrive to assist them.
I just looked at my husband and my son. I said, let's just go.
Minutes later, the Stubbs family arrives at Danielle's home.
As soon as they got there, they noticed that her car wasn't in the driveway.
And when the parents knocked on the door, they couldn't get in, they didn't get a response.
Danielle's family tries to be patient for police arrival, but as time ticks away, the family only becomes more concerned.
Like any mother, Danielle's mother is getting very impatient, so they actually call again.
Jacksonville 911.
Yes, they haven't came out yet. I'm really nervous.
The officer has been assigned, but they're on another call right now.
I really need to get this in motion.
Okay, ma'am. The officer will be there.
With no idea when police will arrive, Danielle's brother decides to take action.
No, I can't wait no more. I'm going around back.
Her brother decides, you know what, I'm gonna go look around on my own. He goes to the back of the house, finds the door unlocked, goes inside, and then goes to the front door to open the door for his parents.
Danielle! Danielle, is she here?
Danielle!
Is she here?
They were calling out for Danielle, got no response, so the brother finally went to check the bedroom. When he went into the bedroom, he saw what no one would want to see.
Danielle's brother found her on the floor in her bedroom.
Oh, no! No!
Did you find her?
Did you find her?
Danielle's family makes another desperate call to 911.
Jacksonville 911. Sir, what happened?
Danielle's brother can barely communicate.
Since she was a child, Danielle Stubbs made it a point to always look her best.
Everybody, people I didn't even know, would be like, oh God, that girl, she's just so beautiful. So that was her little nickname to the community, Miss Beautiful.
When I first met her, to be honest, I was a little intimidated. She was so pretty. She kept her hair, her nails, her outfits always together.
She was very much a girly girl. She had lipstick on, wore makeup, loved eyelashes, just pretty things.
She never went out the house without her bracelets, and she always had on a heel. She rarely wore tennis shoes.
But while Danielle had incomparable style, it wasn't the only reason people called her Miss Beautiful.
Her personality, she was beautiful inside and out. Everybody wanted to be around Danielle. They loved her.
I didn't know anything negative about Danielle. It was crazy. She was very giving.
She made you feel happy.
When 26-year-old Danielle wasn't spending time with family or friends, she was putting in long hours at work.
She was actually working 2 jobs.
She worked full-time in hospital administration in the emergency room at Jacksonville Naval Air Station.
The doctors there, They really enjoyed being around her.
And then she also worked with her mother at their family business in the beauty salon.
She did hair at her mom's shop. She was a braider, but she did a lot of other styles as well, too.
Danielle was really independent. She fully supported herself and just genuinely enjoyed her life.
Danielle, she took very good care of herself. She made sure she always kept herself together. She never asked anybody for anything. She was an awesome person.
Like many women in their 20s, one of Danielle's favorite pastimes was enjoying the nightlife her city had to offer.
Danielle was living the life of what most girls her age would do. She was not married yet, but certainly dating and enjoying going out with her friends.
And in the spring of 2008, a typical night out would change Danielle's life forever.
Danielle was out with some coworkers when she met 24-year-old Justin McMillan.
Hey, that next round's on me.
Oh, thank you.
When Danielle and Justin met, they had this instant chemistry.
No, you really didn't have to do that.
A beautiful girl like you deserve it.
He was very nice to her and catering to her.
It was so easy for them to just open up to one another.
The two of them talked for hours.
He had just came home from being overseas. He spent 2 years in Iraq working with the military as a personal trainer.
Justin was originally from Georgia and had 2 young kids that still lived there with their mother.
So he disclosed all these things to Danielle about what was happening in his life. He had been separated from his wife, and apparently that marriage was ending, but he still wanted to be able to spend time with his kids.
He was feeling a little bit lost. He had just moved back to Florida and was staying with some family until he kind of figured things out.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. Divorce is so hard.
Danielle had just this big heart and a giving spirit.
If you need anything, I'm here for you.
That means a lot.
From there, the relationship between Danielle and Justin took off.
Justin was staying with Danielle quite frequently.
She was having fun. He was just doing what she needed him to do to make her feel secure in a relationship.
I think Danielle liked that Justin had a lot of time for her. He was open to going to family functions and just basically being a good boyfriend to her.
They even discussed getting engaged after Justin's divorce was finalized.
But now Danielle's panicked family is on the phone with 911 after discovering her lifeless body on her bedroom floor.
I just found her dead. Okay, where was she cut or shot or how was she killed?
I don't know, she's been cut in the blood.
The police are on the way and the ambulance as well.
At that point, she was already gone. And I just started rubbing her back, rubbing her back. And I was laying on the floor with her until they came.
Police arrived within minutes.
It's so clear that this woman has died a very violent death, and there's nothing they can do to save her.
I was kind of in shock. I was trying my best to see, was she gone? I just could not believe it.
Who could have done this to Danielle?
In the winter of 2009, 26-year-old Danielle Stubbs seemed like she had it all.
People called Danielle Miss Beautiful, and it was quite evident that she was beautiful inside and out.
And with her handsome boyfriend, Justin McMillan, by her side, the sky was the limit for the couple.
These two really hit it off. Everything just was working. It was like a match made in heaven.
But just hours after reporting her missing, Danielle's family has made a heart-wrenching discovery. Danielle lifeless on the floor of her bedroom.
For us, we were in shock. My baby was gone. She was gone.
The shock waves from Danielle's death echo throughout the community.
I don't think I've ever been that devastated. I hadn't really experienced that kind of hurt.
It was just very devastating. It was more hurtful for me to just see her family just torn apart like that, to be honest. It was just hard.
Homicide detectives are determined to get to the bottom of this tragedy.
Their objective at that point was to process how it happened.
They've noticed multiple gunshot wounds, one in the arm and one in the head.
Police found 2 spent .45 caliber shell casings around Danielle's body and collected it as evidence.
Investigators immediately rule out robbery as the motive for this crime.
They noticed there weren't really any signs or obvious evidence of showing like someone had broken into her home.
There's no signs of forced entry or any valuables missing. So at this point, it's more likely that Danielle was killed by a person that she trusted and had access to her home.
Back at the station, detectives reach out to one of those trusted individuals, Danielle's boyfriend, Justin McMillan.
He had called the police station several times asking to speak with them while they were at the crime scene.
Hey Justin, how you doing? I'd gotten a couple messages to give you a call.
Yeah. I'm trying to figure out what the hell going on, bro.
He said as soon as he heard the news that Danielle was gone, the first thing he did was call Jacksonville police.
Okay. Well, good. Well, then maybe you can help me out a little bit. Is there anything maybe that you might be able to tell me that might be able to help us? When's that last time you've actually seen or talked to her?
It was probably about 6 o'clock Saturday evening.
About 6 o'clock the night before, she invited him to go out with her along with her co-workers out to a club, and he declined the offer.
Justin claims that he went to spend time with his family, and Danielle was supposed to call him when she got home.
This is crazy, because, she told me she was going to call me as soon as she left the club, because she wanted me to spend the night with her.
Right.
Because I was leaving. I was just going to move back to Georgia.
Justin explains that he and Danielle had recently decided to end their relationship.
Due to Justin having personal business, I'm assuming with his kids needing to go back to Georgia, that was going to be the end of them.
Justin said that it was an amicable breakup, that there was no hard feelings.
You can ask any of her friends or parents, man, they have not gotten into one altercation.
But Justin says he never heard from Danielle that night.
Justin tells detectives that he was supposed to hear from Danielle before the club closed, but when he didn't, he decided, okay, well, I might as well hit the road and head to Georgia.
So what time do you think he was out of Jacksonville?
It was maybe 2.
He says he's been in Georgia ever since, but got worried when he hadn't heard from her.
So is there anything that you know, maybe someone that's been upset with her or people she's been hanging out with or anything?
All right, it was this guy.
He mentioned a gentleman by the name of Drew Elder, her co-worker.
Drew was one of the co-workers Danielle had been out clubbing with on the night of January the 10th.
Justin didn't really have a good feeling about Drew.
Justin said he was very disrespectful to him.
In fact, Justin tells detectives he and Drew had a tense run-in just a couple weeks earlier.
About, I'm going to say 2.5 weeks ago, I was driving her car because she took my car and went to the beauty salon. And I was at the gas station, went to go get me something to drink and a pack of Black & Mild.
It was then that Justin ran into Drew.
He was like, hey, that's Danielle's car? And I was like, yeah. He was like, damn, she doing it like that? I was like, what you mean, man? Well, what's up?
Justin was always concerned about Drew with Danielle because he felt that he was too flirty, or he felt that he had a crush on Danielle.
I said, man, what you talking about, man? So he got in the car with his little homeboy and they left or whatever.
Justin said Drew was definitely bad news.
But is he capable of murder?
It sounded like detectives had a love triangle on their hands.
Detectives in Jacksonville, Florida are speaking to Justin McMillan, the ex-boyfriend of 26-year-old murder victim Danielle Stubbs.
Is there anything that you know, maybe someone has been upset with her or people she's been hanging out with or anything?
Justin said on the night that Danielle went missing, she had been out with some coworkers, including a coworker by the name of Drew Elder.
And Justin has nothing good to say about Drew.
Justin told detectives that he was a little bit too flirty when it came to Danielle. He didn't trust him.
It sounded like a classic love triangle.
Detectives are eager to hear what else Justin has to say, but know they need to continue the conversation in person.
You know, it's a shame I can't go into, great details over the phone. I don't know how far in Georgia are you, but how long would it take you to get to Jacksonville?
Well,
2 hours, okay. Would you mind meeting me somewhere? Maybe I can show you a couple things and I can be done with you and I can move on.
Yeah.
Detectives asked Justin if he would come in to the station, and he said absolutely.
As detectives wait for Justin to arrive, they turn their attention to Danielle's coworker and alleged admirer, Drew Elder.
If Drew really wanted Danielle, it's no telling how far he would go, especially if she refused his advances.
It doesn't take long for detectives to track down Drew and bring him in for questioning.
He seemed shocked to learn that Danielle was found deceased.
I just saw her the other night. I can't believe she's gone.
They asked Drew, did he and Danielle ever have a romantic relationship?
He admitted that he was attracted to her, and when Danielle told him that her and Justin had broken up, he became excited.
Broken up. I was happy about that because it meant I had a chance with her. Sure.
Detectives ask Drew to give them a timeline of his night with Danielle.
Drew says they met up at their coworker's house at 9 p.m. and he drove all three of them to the club and they just had a good old time and danced the night away.
The three ended up staying out super late until the clubs basically closed.
He decided he would take her home to make sure she got home safe.
Thank you for the ride home.
Of course.
He did get the feeling that she was into him, and maybe their friendship would become something more.
We got there around 3:30. She got out and went inside. And that's it.
You never went inside her place?
No.
Drew was adamant that he just stayed inside the car.
Drew swears to police that he thought she was the most beautiful and amazing person. He swears he didn't kill her.
Did you see anyone else around when you dropped her off?
Well, there was a brown Cadillac parked outside.
Police asked him, could he tell if there was anyone inside? But he said he couldn't because the tent was too dark on the car.
If Drew wasn't responsible for what happened to Danielle, could the owner of the brown Cadillac be involved somehow?
At this point, Drew was still one of their prime suspects, and they weren't even sure if he was telling the truth.
But when detectives dig deeper into their new lead, they make a chilling discovery.
They find that Justin McMillan has a brown Cadillac registered under his name.
When detectives spoke with Justin, he said he was already in Georgia at the time. So who was telling the truth? Drew or Justin?
Investigators hope surveillance footage can give them the answers they need.
Detectives go to all of the gas stations located near Danielle's home to collect whatever surveillance video they could find.
If they caught Justin's brown Cadillac on camera at one of the local gas stations early that morning, it's likely that Drew was telling the truth.
And detectives are in luck.
Wait, pause it right there.
They found just what they were looking for.
Detectives see Justin's Cadillac pull into a gas station.
They see video footage of the man get out of the brown Cadillac that matches the description of Justin McMillan.
The time signature on the tape showed him pulling the car in at 4 a.m.
2 hours after he said that he had left town.
They realize that he has lied to them. Now, the investigators are anxious to hear how he intends to explain this 2-hour difference.
But even though Justin was supposed to arrive in Jacksonville hours ago, detectives are still left waiting.
Justin told detectives that day that he would meet with them once he drove back to Florida. So detectives called Justin to see where he was.
I'm getting ready to head back in a few minutes now.
Oh, are you really?
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I don't have nothing to run from. I don't have nothing to hide from.
No one's saying that, Justin. We're just trying to figure out what's going on, and if you can help me, that'd be great.
However, by the next day, Justin still hasn't shown up.
Detectives sit and wait, and time just continues to go by. They call, they get no answer.
He never came.
Since it appears Justin is evading them, their only option is to bring him in by force.
He can run, but he can't hide. But in order to track Justin down, they incorporate the help of the U.S. Marshals to do a manhunt search.
Once U.S. Marshals are on the case, they quickly zero in on their target.
On the afternoon of January 14th, 2009, the police locate Justin at a house in Jacksonville. They did surveillance and found that he was leaving the home, driving the brown Cadillac.
Marshals pulled behind him and turned their emergency lights on in an effort to pull him over.
He pulled over, seeming to comply, but opened his door and launched off in a full run.
The marshals engage in a foot chase, yelling at him, telling him to stop. Justin refuses to give up.
But the situation takes a violent spin as Justin resists arrest.
Justin turned to the police officer and shot in the direction of the patrol car. The U.S. Marshals returned fire.
He figured he would go down in a blaze.
On January 14, 2009, authorities in Jacksonville, Florida are attempting to apprehend the man they suspect murdered Danielle Stubbs, her ex-boyfriend, Justin McMillan. But the Air Force veteran isn't going down without a fight.
He doesn't want to be caught. He's going down in a blaze.
He shot at the police officers.
Fortunately, none of the marshals were hit by Justin's gun. However, Justin had suffered several gunshot wounds.
Hey, we're gonna need medical out here ASAP.
Justin was hit 6 times, and that's when he was apprehended.
Although Jacksonville detectives are relieved to finally have Justin in custody, his injuries will definitely complicate their investigative process.
Justin is rushed to the hospital in critical condition. Detectives don't know whether or not he'll survive this incident.
If Justin dies, then the truth behind Danielle's murder could be a mystery forever.
Doctors do everything they can to keep Justin alive.
He underwent several surgeries. He was also put into a medically induced coma.
Meanwhile, investigators compare the bullets collected from the shootout to the ones found in Danielle's bedroom.
The casings that were found in Danielle Stubbs' apartment came from a .45 caliber handgun, the same type of gun that was collected at the shootout with the U.S. Marshals.
With all of this evidence pointing towards Justin, what detectives want now is a confession.
And 2 weeks later, they'll get their chance when Justin awakens from his coma.
On January 29th, detectives from the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office met Justin in his hospital room.
Justin, hey man, how you feeling? Doing better? Okay.
when we talked on the phone, you remember talking to me? Yeah. I want to go back over a little bit of that with you.
But when prodded by detectives, Justin stands by his original story and claims the last time he spoke to Danielle was around 10 p.m. on the 10th.
Seems like she was going out with some friends from work.
Were you mad that she was gone? No.
He said he hung out with his family in Jacksonville that night, waiting for Danielle to call after she left the club, but she never did.
I stayed there until about 2. Went to the gas station. Put some gas in my car. Went towards it.
However, the surveillance video shows otherwise, that he was still in town at 4 a.m.
Detectives let Justin know that they know he's lying about getting on the road at 2 a.m.
You know that little gas station right around the corner from her house? You're on video in there. You went inside. Your car's actually out in the parking lot. But this is at 4 o'clock in the morning.
Realizing he's caught in a lie, Justin admits he was outside Danielle's home when Drew Elder dropped her off at 3:30 a.m.
He said he still loved her and wanted to say goodbye before he left to go back to Georgia.
You wasn't mad? There's nothing wrong with being angry. That's just it's a human emotion.
No. Okay, what happens from there?
Inside. Passenger said have fun.
He said she seemed to be very happy to see him. They went upstairs.
Did you already have the gun in the house at that time?
Who's upstairs with me?
I'm gonna miss you when I have to move back to Georgia. I'm not ready to say goodbye.
I know.
Justin said he laid down to go to sleep with Danielle, and the next thing he knew, he blacked out.
Everything was blank. Everything was quiet.
And Justin says when he came to, he was horrified by what he saw.
She wasn't moving.
2 weeks after his violent shootout with police, Jacksonville detectives are finally speaking with murder suspect Justin McMillan.
They shot him 6 times and his ass still didn't die.
Justin now claims he woke up on the morning of January 11th to find Danielle dead.
Did you try to wake her up or move or help her? Justin, look at me. Did you panic? Yes?
Yes.
And you leave? And you don't dial 911? You don't call family?
I'm looking for you. I really don't.
Saying you blanked out ain't gonna cut it. You a healthy man. The military.
Detectives are tired of hearing the lie, so they let him know that they know that he's not telling the truth, and they have evidence to prove it.
Detectives tell Justin that they sent the bullets from his shootout with U.S. Marshals to be tested against the bullets found in Danielle's bedroom.
What do you think the results were? It was a match. Yeah. Now you're in a tight situation right now, okay?
At this point, Justin is beginning to realize that the walls are closing in.
We know the rest of the answers. Okay, we know the where and the who and the what and the how, but why? What happened in there that was so bad that you had to shoot her? Was it her being dropped off by the guy? I mean, honestly. Huh? Is that what it was?
Justin can't take the pressure any longer.
He now admitted to being angry when he saw Danielle's co-worker, Drew Elder, drop her off.
Justin claimed to police at that time that he was angry that she had been out with another man.
He waited till she went inside, and that's when he went in behind her.
Like, you think you could just sit there and disrespect me like that?
We aren't together anymore, Justin. I can do whatever I want.
What?
They had a fight. I'm sure they had a fight. Danielle was a fighter.
That's when I lost you.
Huh? Thought about him? And you lost it. What happened? What happened? I shot.
He was like, ain't nobody gonna have you if I can't have you. That's how he thought in his head.
And then what? Shot her again?
That's when Justin admits he fired the fatal shot into her head.
She was shot twice, so he meant to kill her. He literally meant to kill her.
Once Danielle was dead, he just walked out. He went to a nearby gas station to fill up his car and then left for Georgia.
I wish none of this would have happened. I deserve to be punished.
Yeah, probably so.
The detectives tell him that he's going to be charged with the murder of Danielle Stubbs, as well as attempted murder of U.S. Marshals.
Word of Justin's arrest spreads like wildfire.
Once he went to jail, they caught him and everything. We saw it on the news, and people were calling. I mean, it was a big time. It was a big thing in Jacksonville.
It was a sigh of relief, but at the same time, I knew it wasn't gonna bring my friend back.
With Justin McMillan's confession now on record, investigators are hoping for an easy conviction. But as the trial looms closer, they get an unexpected call from the Duval County Jail.
While awaiting trial, Justin asked to speak with members of the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office.
Detectives sit down with Justin again, this time in an interrogation room.
I ain't seen you since you was at the hospital. You're looking a lot better, like I said, man. You putting on some weight. Look like you're healing up, okay?
He told detectives, what I have to say, you're not gonna believe.
It's pertaining to that night.
Okay.
I didn't pull the trigger.
He changed his story entirely.
Jacksonville detectives have finally obtained a confession from Justin McMillan for the murder of his ex-girlfriend, Danielle Stubbs. But while in jail awaiting trial, Justin makes a shocking announcement.
Justin suddenly decides he wants to recant his story.
I didn't pull the trigger.
Police asked Justin, well, why did you confess to it then at the hospital? And he acts confused.
Justin says that he was on so many painkillers that he doesn't even remember talking to the detectives.
You don't?
He's claiming that during the hospital stay, he was on too much medication to give a statement.
They had me on so many drugs.
Well, they really didn't.
They really didn't.
I'm not going to dispute that with you. I mean, we get the hospital records.
In fact, the hospital record showed he'd only been on Motrin at the time that he gave his initial statement to the police.
So if you're not the one that shot her, then who's the one that did? Who would be responsible for it?
I don't know.
Justin explains that when he went to Danielle's home on January 10th, he was just stopping by on his way to Georgia to pick something up he'd left there, his pistol.
Damn, my pistol upstairs. I hope ain't nobody in here.
Mm-hmm.
So I go upstairs and I say, Danielle. Oh, ain't nothing.
Danielle.
He says that's when he saw her deceased.
My pistol was laying on the bed because I left my pistol there.
Justin tells investigators at that point he just panicked.
But she wasn't moving. I was like, Danielle. She didn't respond, so I was like, oh, hell no. Okay. I grabbed my phone and I left. I mean, at the time, I knew nobody wasn't gonna believe that, and I know now ain't nobody really gonna believe it.
Justin was essentially claiming that someone else killed Danielle with his gun, framing him for the crime. It's just ridiculous.
Did it ever cross your mind to call for some help? Because that's going to be the obvious question.
It crossed my mind 1,000 times. Ain't nobody gonna believe I didn't pull the trigger because I got the weapon. It's my weapon.
still inside?
He swears that he is telling the truth.
But detectives aren't buying it.
This is the third story that Justin had given police now, and they had just run out of patience for him.
Detectives tell him at this point it's going to be up to a judge and jury.
In June of 2010, Justin gets his chance to plead his case in court.
Justin McMillan goes on trial for the murder of Danielle Stubbs and the attempted murder of U.S. Marshals. He knows that he's facing the death penalty.
The trial, I didn't want to look at that man. I didn't want to see him, but I looked at him. And I said, I said, it looked like a demon. That's what I said, it looked like a demon.
His defense team realized with the ballistic evidence against him, as well as his original confession at the hospital, they would never be able to convince a jury that he did not shoot Danielle.
So instead, they attempt to at least save him from the death penalty.
During the trial, the defendant did make the decision to testify. He admitted again to shooting Danielle. But the defense had a theory of the case that this defendant at the time was just suffering from what we would call a depraved mind.
Justin's defense team argues that since he shot at Danielle in the heat of passion, that he shouldn't get the death penalty and that he should get second-degree murder.
However, the prosecution is ready with a rebuttal.
What the state argued was that it was the defendant who shot Danielle, first shooting her in the right arm, an injury that she would have likely survived, and then he made the decision to shoot her in the head.
After just 6 hours of deliberation, the jury comes to a decision: guilty on all charges.
He's convicted of first-degree murder and given the death penalty as a result.
But just 2 months into his sentence, Justin still isn't willing to accept punishment for what he's done.
Justin attempts to escape prison.
And while Justin's attempt at escaping prison is unsuccessful, he is able to escape the death penalty.
The death penalty law did later change in the state of Florida, and at this time, Justin McMillan is serving life in prison without the possibility of parole.
For those that loved and cherished Danielle, Justin's conviction and subsequent sentencing offers little solace.
It was a relief with the guilty verdict. But at the same time, though, my daughter is gone. He should have never been off death row. He should have been on that 10 by 10 cell with that black and white TV and reading one book a day. He shouldn't have access to anything because we don't have access to anything but a grave.
She was taken from us, and for what, because he was upset. You shouldn't be killing people just because your feelings are hurt. Like, that's weak.
He stripped her from her story. She's not gonna get married. She's not gonna have kids. It was just a blessing to know her. The short amount of time.
The city of Phoenix is often described as a place of endless sunlight. For most of the year, the desert sky stretches without interruption, glowing above miles of highways, quiet neighborhoods, apartment complexes, and shopping centers that seem to blend into the horizon. Winter arrives differently here than it does across much of America. Instead of snow and frozen streets, December brings cooler evenings, crisp desert air, and a rhythm of ordinary life that rarely slows. Families gather for the holidays. Restaurants stay busy. Traffic continues long after sunset. It is a city that appears calm on the surface, confident in its routines, almost immune to the darkness that captures headlines elsewhere. Yet every city carries another face. Sometimes it reveals itself gradually, hidden beneath ordinary conversations and familiar streets. Sometimes it appears all at once, forcing an entire community to question whether the place they believed they understood ever truly existed. In the closing weeks of 2017, Phoenix would become that kind of city. It began quietly enough that almost nobody recognized what they were looking at. 2 young men were found dead inside a parked vehicle. There were no dramatic police chases, no public shootout, no frantic emergency calls describing a masked gunman running through the streets. Just a silent car. 2 lifeless bodies. 2 gunshot wounds delivered with chilling precision. Detectives considered the possibility that they were looking at an isolated incident connected to drugs or personal disputes. Phoenix had seen violent crime before. Sadly, shootings were not unheard of. Cases like this often carried explanations that, while tragic, remained confined to the people directly involved. Nothing at that moment suggested that investigators had just stepped into the opening chapter of one of the deadliest killing sprees in the city's modern history. The days continued. People drove to work beneath bright desert mornings. Children climbed onto school buses. Office workers stopped for coffee before disappearing into downtown buildings. Couples planned Christmas shopping. Decorations appeared outside homes across Maricopa County, where colorful lights contrasted against cactus silhouettes and pale desert landscapes. Life insisted on moving forward, just as it always had. But somewhere in that same city, another story was unfolding. Someone was moving quietly through neighborhoods that looked entirely ordinary. Someone carried a handgun. Someone appeared capable of looking another human being in the eyes before pulling the trigger without hesitation. The terrifying reality was not simply that people were dying. It was that nobody understood why. There were no obvious patterns. No public threats. No manifesto. No clear warning that ordinary residents could recognize before becoming the next victim. That uncertainty would become one of the investigation's greatest nightmares. Serial crimes often leave signatures. Investigators search for repeated behaviors, familiar locations, similar victims, or consistent motives. Even when killers attempt to conceal their identities, human behavior frequently creates patterns that trained detectives eventually recognize. This case refused to cooperate. Some victims knew the man prosecutors would later identify as the killer. Others had no known relationship with him. Some appeared connected to criminal activity. Others seemed to have simply crossed paths with extraordinary violence. Every answer uncovered by detectives seemed to create 2 new questions. As December approached, fear spread slowly rather than explosively. Residents did not immediately panic because they did not know there was anything to fear. The crimes were separated by days, sometimes by different locations, sometimes by circumstances that appeared unrelated. Each scene looked like its own tragedy. Only later would investigators begin placing photographs across conference room tables, drawing lines between addresses, comparing shell casings, studying timelines, reviewing surveillance footage frame by frame, and realizing that the city had not been witnessing separate crimes. It had been watching one story unfold. A story that would ultimately leave 8 people dead in only 21 days. The number alone is startling. 8 lives. 8 families forever altered. 8 futures erased before Christmas. Behind every statistic was a person whose life had once felt ordinary. Someone had favorite meals. Someone laughed at jokes that no longer made anyone smile. Someone expected tomorrow to arrive. None of them knew they were living through their final weeks. That truth sits at the center of nearly every true crime case. Long before headlines are written and courtroom sketches appear on television, life continues normally for the people whose names will eventually become known across the country. They wake up believing they have time. They make plans for the weekend. They promise friends they will call later. They tell parents they love them. They argue, forgive, celebrate birthdays, pay bills, and imagine futures they will never reach. The public usually meets victims through police reports. Their families remember them differently. They remember voices, expressions, inside jokes. Old photographs. Holiday traditions. The empty chair that suddenly appears at every family gathering afterward. Those absences cannot be measured in evidence bags or forensic reports. As investigators worked through one homicide after another, they were not simply collecting shell casings and fingerprints. They were carrying the responsibility of speaking for people who no longer could. Every unanswered question mattered because every delay meant another family waited without understanding why someone they loved would never return home. The man prosecutors would eventually accuse was not an unknown stranger living completely outside society. His name was Cleophas Emmanuel Cooksey Jr. He had spent years inside the criminal justice system before his release during 2017. His past included armed robbery, gang involvement, and a previous conviction connected to a fatal shooting. 16 years behind bars had consumed much of his adult life. When he walked out of prison, he entered a world that had changed dramatically. Technology had evolved. Social media had transformed daily communication. Entire neighborhoods had grown. Many people leaving prison struggle with that transition. Some attempt to rebuild relationships. Others search for stable employment despite the enormous barriers created by criminal records. Reintegration can be painfully difficult, particularly after long sentences. Cooksey attempted to build an identity within music, presenting himself under the rap name King Playbola. To outsiders, that image suggested ambition. Perhaps reinvention. Perhaps an effort to leave old chapters behind. But appearances often conceal realities that only emerge later. According to prosecutors, the months following his release did not represent a successful return to ordinary life. Instead, they marked the beginning of a chain of events that investigators would later reconstruct through physical evidence, surveillance footage, forensic science, and witness testimony. One of the most disturbing aspects of this case was not merely the violence itself. It was the apparent absence of a clear motive connecting every victim. Money alone did not explain everything. Personal revenge failed to fit every crime. There was no ideological message. No political objective. No campaign of racial hatred. Even after years of investigation, courtroom proceedings, and countless hours spent reviewing evidence, authorities could not present one simple explanation answering the question that naturally follows every tragedy. Why? Why these people? Why during those 21 days? Why continue after the first killing? Questions without satisfying answers often linger longer than solved mysteries. Perhaps that is why this case continues to unsettle investigators and residents alike. People expect evil to make sense. Reality often refuses. As detectives worked under increasing pressure, they understood something the public still did not. Every passing day carried the possibility that another murder scene awaited them. Every ringing phone after midnight might announce another victim. Every patrol officer responding to what appeared to be a routine call could unknowingly step into another piece of the same horrifying puzzle. Some investigations allow detectives time to breathe. This one did not. While evidence traveled between crime laboratories, while forensic specialists examined bullets under comparison microscopes, while surveillance technicians enlarged blurry security footage one frame at a time, the clock continued moving. If one person was responsible, then one person was still free. And if that person had killed repeatedly before, there was no guarantee the violence had ended. The investigation would eventually reveal remarkable forensic connections that transformed isolated homicide files into one of Arizona's most significant serial murder prosecutions. A stolen handgun would become far more than stolen property. A gold chain would become silent testimony. DNA would speak where witnesses could not. Cell phone records would reconstruct movements that memory alone never could. Security cameras installed for everyday business would unexpectedly preserve fragments of truth. Bit by bit, evidence would replace speculation. But none of that was visible during those first terrifying weeks. At the beginning, all Phoenix knew was that people were dying. Families were grieving. Detectives were chasing fragments. And somewhere beyond the flashing police lights, a man continued walking through the same streets as everyone else, blending into crowds that had no reason to believe they had already passed within a few feet of the individual investigators desperately needed to find. This is the story of those 21 days. It is the story of 8 lives cut short, of investigators racing against time, of evidence that slowly assembled itself into an undeniable chain, and of a case whose central mystery has never been completely answered. Because even after the arrests, the trial, and the convictions, one haunting question remained suspended over everything that happened in Phoenix during the winter of 2017. Not who. Not how. But why? Phoenix, Arizona, is a city of contrasts. Towering office buildings stand only a few miles from neighborhoods where modest apartment complexes stretch block after block beneath rows of palm trees. During the day, sunlight reflects from glass towers and wide highways. At night, the desert cools quickly, and long shadows settle over streets that can appear almost peaceful. In late 2017, more than 1.6 million people called Phoenix home. It was one of the fastest-growing cities in the United States, attracting families, students, retirees, and workers from across the country. Most residents viewed it as a place of opportunity rather than fear. Like any major metropolitan area, Phoenix faced persistent challenges. Property crime, gang activity, illegal drug markets, and occasional violent offenses were familiar concerns for local law enforcement. Yet these incidents were typically concentrated within particular disputes or criminal networks. Investigators were accustomed to examining shootings linked to narcotics, robberies, or personal conflicts. Most cases, while tragic, eventually revealed a motive that helped explain why one individual had targeted another. The events that unfolded during the final weeks of 2017 did not fit comfortably into those expectations. The first homicide scene initially appeared consistent with a targeted shooting. 2 young men had been found inside a parked vehicle, each fatally wounded by gunfire. Detectives began their work in the same disciplined manner they approached every homicide. They documented the scene, interviewed potential witnesses, examined surveillance cameras in the surrounding area, and explored the victim's recent movements and personal relationships. At that stage, there was no confirmed indication that the deaths were connected to any broader pattern. The possibility of a drug-related dispute was considered among several investigative theories. Such possibilities are common in homicide investigations because detectives must evaluate every reasonable explanation supported by available evidence rather than rely on assumptions. Early conclusions are intentionally cautious. Investigators know that first impressions can be misleading, especially before forensic testing and witness interviews are complete. While that investigation continued, daily life across Phoenix remained largely unchanged. Morning commuters filled Interstate 10 and Loop 202. Students attended classes before winter break. Holiday decorations appeared outside homes and businesses. Shopping centers became increasingly crowded as Christmas approached. Restaurants extended their hours to accommodate seasonal gatherings. For most residents, news of a homicide involving 2 young men was undoubtedly disturbing, but it did not yet suggest that an extraordinary threat existed. The city's police officers, however, understood how quickly circumstances could change. Every homicide investigation requires patience, but it also demands urgency. Detectives know that physical evidence can deteriorate, witnesses may forget important details, and surveillance recordings are often erased after only a short period unless investigators obtain them promptly. Even in cases that appear straightforward, every passing hour matters. Phoenix police detectives assigned to violent crimes carried that awareness into each new day. Then, only a few days later, another fatal shooting occurred. A 31-year-old man named Salim Richards was shot while walking outdoors. During the investigation, detectives learned that his personal belongings had been taken, including a Glock 9mm handgun that he legally possessed. At the time, the missing firearm represented one detail among many. Stolen property is not unusual in robbery-related homicides, and investigators documented its disappearance as part of the growing case file. No one could yet know that the missing pistol would later become one of the investigation's most significant pieces of evidence. As December progressed, detectives were balancing multiple active homicide investigations simultaneously. Each case required separate interviews, forensic examinations, laboratory requests, and coordination with patrol officers and crime analysts. While some investigators concentrated on victim backgrounds, others focused on ballistics, digital evidence, and neighborhood canvases. Law enforcement agencies rarely assume that multiple violent crimes are connected without supporting evidence. Doing so risks overlooking important facts unique to each investigation. Instead, detectives compare details carefully, looking for objective similarities rather than relying on instinct alone. Several days later, another victim was discovered. Latery Beckford, 29 years old, had been fatally shot inside an apartment complex in Glendale, a neighboring community within the greater Phoenix metropolitan area. The circumstances differed in several respects from earlier cases, yet forensic analysis would eventually establish an important connection. Ballistics testing later demonstrated that the bullets recovered from this crime scene had been fired from the same Glock handgun stolen from Salim Richards. That scientific finding would become one of the earliest objective links between what had previously appeared to be unrelated crimes. Firearms examination plays a critical role in modern homicide investigations. When a gun is fired, microscopic imperfections inside the barrel leave distinctive markings on bullets. Qualified firearms examiners compare these markings under specialized microscopes to determine whether bullets recovered from different scenes were fired by the same weapon. While this process requires careful analysis and peer review, it often provides investigators with powerful evidence connecting separate crimes. For detectives in Phoenix, those laboratory results significantly altered the direction of the investigation. Instead of examining isolated homicides, investigators increasingly considered the possibility that one individual, or perhaps a small group, might be responsible for multiple killings. At that stage, however, many questions remained unanswered. Investigators still lacked a clear suspect. They still lacked a clear motive. Most importantly, they could not yet predict whether additional violence would occur. As law enforcement agencies coordinated information across jurisdictions, analysts began constructing increasingly detailed timelines. Crime scene photographs, laboratory reports, witness statements, and surveillance footage were reviewed repeatedly. Detectives compared locations, examined victim associations, and searched for common factors that might explain why these particular individuals had been targeted. Some similarities existed. Others did not. The victims varied in age and background. Some appeared to know one another indirectly. Others shared no immediately identifiable connection. That complexity made the investigation especially challenging. Experienced investigators often describe homicide work as assembling a puzzle without knowing how many pieces exist or whether all of them have been found. In this case, detectives were attempting to solve multiple puzzles simultaneously while remaining alert to the possibility that another crime scene could emerge at any moment. Their concern proved justified. Additional victims would soon be identified, and with each new homicide the urgency intensified. The investigation expanded beyond traditional interviews and forensic testing. Detectives sought assistance from crime analysts, digital evidence specialists, and laboratory personnel capable of processing increasing amounts of physical evidence. Surveillance cameras from businesses, residential complexes, and nearby roadways became valuable investigative resources. Cell phone records, when legally obtained, offered opportunities to reconstruct movements and identify potential associations among individuals connected to the cases. Modern homicide investigations often depend upon the careful integration of many different forms of evidence rather than a single dramatic discovery. Physical evidence, digital records, witness accounts, forensic science, and investigative experience each contribute part of the overall picture. Rarely does one clue solve an entire case. Instead, certainty develops gradually. Each verified fact supports another. Each confirmed timeline eliminates additional possibilities. Each laboratory result strengthens, or weakens, a developing theory. Throughout these early stages, investigators remained cautious about drawing conclusions before the evidence justified them. Public speculation inevitably accompanied media coverage, but detectives focused on verifiable facts rather than rumors. Their responsibility was not simply to identify a suspect but to assemble evidence capable of meeting the demanding legal standard required in court. That distinction would become increasingly important as the investigation progressed. The crimes had begun to reveal connections, yet many uncertainties remained. Detectives still faced the difficult task of determining whether the individual responsible had acted alone, whether additional offenses might be linked, and whether intervention could prevent further loss of life. For the broader Phoenix community, most residents still viewed the individual incidents as separate tragedies reported across local news broadcasts. The larger pattern had not yet fully emerged in public understanding. Families continued preparing for the holiday season, largely unaware that investigators were confronting one of the most complex homicide investigations the region had experienced in years. Behind the scenes, however, the picture was changing. Evidence collected from different crime scenes was beginning to intersect. Independent investigations were gradually becoming one. And although investigators did not yet know the full extent of what they were facing, they were moving steadily toward the realization that the violence was neither random in the ordinary sense nor easily explained by conventional motives. The weeks ahead would test every available investigative resource, requiring detectives to connect evidence spread across multiple crime scenes, multiple victims, and multiple days before the emerging pattern could finally point them toward the individual prosecutors would later identify as Cleophas Emmanuel Cooksey Jr. long before investigators connected shell casings, surveillance footage, and forensic evidence. There were people whose lives followed ordinary routines. They had families, friends, responsibilities, and plans that extended well beyond the final weeks of 2017. One of the enduring principles of responsible crime reporting is to remember that homicide investigations begin not with suspects, but with victims. Their names appear in police files because their lives ended unexpectedly, not because their identities should be reduced to evidence. Public records concerning several of the victims in this case remain limited. Court proceedings and law enforcement documents understandably focused on establishing the facts necessary to prosecute the offender rather than documenting every aspect of each victim's personal history. As a result, much of what is known publicly concerns the circumstances of their deaths rather than the fuller stories of their lives. That absence should not be mistaken for a lack of significance. Every victim represented an individual whose loss was deeply felt by those who knew them. Andrew Remillard was 27 years old. Like many young adults living in a large metropolitan area, he was navigating the ordinary complexities of adult life. Publicly available information about his personal background is limited, and responsible reporting avoids filling those gaps with speculation. What is known is that his life ended during the first homicide that investigators would later connect to the broader series of killings. His death became one of the earliest pieces of a much larger investigation, but to those who knew him, it was first and foremost a personal loss. Alongside Andrew was Parker Smith, only 21 years old. At an age when many people are beginning careers, continuing their education, or making plans for the future, Parker's life was abruptly cut short. Like Andrew, much of his private life remained outside public view. That privacy deserves respect. Criminal investigations often bring intense public attention, but they do not erase an individual's right to be remembered as more than a case number. For detectives, Andrew and Parker's deaths initially appeared to be a tragic double homicide requiring careful investigation. For their families, however, the experience was profoundly different. The legal process asks questions about timelines, evidence, and possible motives. Families ask different questions. They wonder why their loved one is gone, whether they suffered, and how life can continue after receiving news that permanently alters every future holiday, birthday, and family gathering. Only a few days later, another family would face the same unimaginable reality. Salim Richards was 31 years old. Public court records identify him as the victim of a fatal shooting during which several personal belongings were taken, including his Glock 9mm handgun and a gold chain. Those items would later become significant pieces of evidence linking multiple crime scenes together. Yet before they became exhibits in a courtroom, they were simply possessions belonging to a man whose life had ended unexpectedly. The investigation would later reveal that the stolen firearm connected several of the subsequent murders through ballistic examination. Forensic science transformed an object into evidence, but it is important to remember why that evidence existed in the first place. It existed because someone had been killed. Latery Beckford, 29 years old, became another victim in the growing investigation. Ballistics testing would eventually determine that the bullets recovered in his homicide had been fired from the same handgun taken from Salim Richards. This discovery marked an important investigative breakthrough, but for those close to Latery, the scientific connection offered little comfort. The loss of a family member cannot be measured by laboratory findings or courtroom exhibits. Every homicide investigation involves two parallel realities. One unfolds inside police departments, forensic laboratories, and courtrooms. The other unfolds quietly inside homes where an empty bedroom remains untouched, where photographs suddenly carry new meaning, and where conversations begin with the painful acknowledgement that someone will never return. As investigators work to establish links between crime scenes, another young life was lost. Christopher Cameron was 21 years old. According to prosecutors, he had arranged to meet Cleophas Cooksey before he was killed. The circumstances surrounding that meeting became part of the prosecution's case during later court proceedings. Beyond those facts, however, responsible reporting remains careful not to assume details that have not been established through evidence. Court records focus primarily on proving criminal responsibility rather than documenting the complete lives of victims. That distinction matters. While legal proceedings necessarily examine the circumstances surrounding a person's death, they rarely capture the countless ordinary moments that defined that person's life before becoming part of a homicide investigation. Maria Villanueva, 43 years old, was another victim whose case carried particular significance during the investigation. Surveillance footage documented portions of her final known movements, and forensic evidence later helped investigators strengthen the case against the defendant. Prosecutors also presented evidence that her vehicle had been taken after her death. Maria's case illustrates how modern investigations increasingly rely upon technology. Surveillance cameras, digital evidence, and DNA analysis all contributed important information. Yet behind every technological advancement remains a simple and deeply human purpose: providing answers for families and establishing accountability through reliable evidence. The final two victims occupied a unique and especially painful place within the investigation. Renee Cooksey, 56 years old, was the defendant's mother. Edward Nunn, 54 years old, was his stepfather. Their deaths shocked investigators for reasons extending beyond the immediate crime scene. Homicides involving close family members often raise difficult questions about relationships, mental state, and possible motives. In this case, publicly available evidence has not established a single comprehensive explanation for why they were killed. The jury later convicted Cleophas Cooksey Jr. of their murders, but the underlying motive remains uncertain. For surviving relatives, these deaths carried multiple layers of tragedy. Families affected by violent crime often experience complicated emotions when both the victims and the convicted offender belong to the same family network. Grief, confusion, anger, and unanswered questions may coexist for years after criminal proceedings conclude. Throughout the investigation and subsequent trial, prosecutors assembled evidence intended to establish responsibility beyond a reasonable doubt. Defense attorneys challenged aspects of that evidence, as is expected within the American legal system. Ultimately, jurors evaluated the testimony, forensic findings, digital evidence, and physical exhibits presented during trial before reaching their verdicts. Those legal outcomes are an essential part of the historical record. Equally important, however, is recognizing that every name associated with this case represented an individual life. Crime statistics often reduce people to numbers. 8 victims. 21 days. Multiple crime scenes. While such figures help describe the scale of an investigation, they cannot communicate the full impact experienced by families, friends, co-workers, and communities. Every homicide creates a circle of loss extending far beyond the immediate victim. Parents lose children. Children lose parents. Friends lose lifelong companions. Communities lose neighbors whose absence is felt in countless ordinary moments. Responsible true crime storytelling requires balancing public interest with respect for those affected. The objective is not to sensationalize violence but to understand how investigators uncovered the truth, how the justice system responded, and what lessons may help prevent future tragedies. The victims in this case did not choose to become part of a widely reported criminal investigation. Their names now appear in court records because circumstances beyond their control placed them at the center of one of Arizona's most significant homicide prosecutions. Remembering them as individuals rather than simply as evidence honors a principle shared by many investigators, prosecutors, victim advocates, and journalists. The purpose of seeking justice is not only to identify the person responsible but also to acknowledge the lives that were taken. As the investigation moved forward, detectives increasingly recognized that these deaths were not isolated events. Scientific evidence was beginning to connect separate crime scenes into a single, expanding investigation. The challenge before law enforcement was no longer simply to solve one homicide. It was to determine whether a single offender was responsible for multiple killings and, if so, to identify that individual before additional lives were lost. The answers would emerge gradually through forensic analysis, surveillance evidence, witness interviews, and meticulous investigative work. Those efforts would eventually transform a series of seemingly unrelated crimes into one of the most consequential homicide prosecutions in Arizona's recent history. During the final weeks of 2017, detectives with the Phoenix Police Department were confronted with a series of homicide investigations that, at first glance, appeared unrelated. Each crime scene required its own forensic examination, witness interviews, and evidence collection. Early investigative decisions were based on the facts available at each location rather than on assumptions that the incidents were connected. On November 27, 2017, officers responded to a report involving a parked vehicle in Phoenix. Inside, they discovered 2 deceased men, later identified as 27-year-old Andrew Remillard and 21-year-old Parker Smith. Both had died from gunshot wounds. Detectives secured the scene, documented physical evidence, and began interviewing potential witnesses in the surrounding area. As is common in homicide investigations, detectives considered multiple possible explanations. Investigators examined whether the victims had recently communicated with anyone who might have information, reviewed their recent movements, and explored the possibility that the deaths resulted from a personal dispute, robbery, or activity connected to illegal drug markets. At that stage, there was no confirmed evidence establishing that the case formed part of a broader series. Several days later, on December 2, investigators responded to another fatal shooting involving 31-year-old Salim Richards. During the investigation, detectives determined that Richards' Glock 9mm handgun and a gold chain were missing. Because robbery can accompany violent crime, these missing items were documented as potentially significant evidence, although investigators could not yet know how important they would later become. The firearm was entered into law enforcement databases, and detectives continued searching for witnesses and surveillance footage that might clarify the circumstances surrounding the shooting. The case remained active while forensic laboratories processed evidence collected at the scene. On December 13, another homicide occurred. 29-year-old Latery Beckford was found dead at an apartment complex in Glendale. Crime scene investigators recovered ballistic evidence and submitted it for laboratory comparison with evidence from other recent shootings. This examination proved especially important. Firearms examiners compare microscopic markings left on bullets and cartridge cases after a weapon is fired. Those markings can help determine whether evidence recovered from different crime scenes originated from the same firearm. Such conclusions are based on detailed laboratory analysis rather than visual inspection alone. In this case, forensic testing ultimately indicated that the ballistic evidence from Beckford's homicide matched the Glock handgun stolen from Salim Richards. That finding fundamentally changed the investigation. Rather than treating the homicide as an isolated event, detectives now had objective forensic evidence suggesting that multiple crimes were linked through the same weapon. This did not immediately identify the offender, but it established that investigators should begin examining the cases collectively. Crime analysts expanded their review of recent homicides across the Phoenix metropolitan area. Detectives compared timelines, victim backgrounds, geographic locations, and digital evidence to determine whether additional connections existed. Investigative teams from different units shared information more extensively as the possibility of a serial offender became increasingly plausible. The investigation became more urgent on December 15. 21-year-old Christopher Cameron was killed after meeting an individual whom prosecutors would later identify as Cleophas Cooksey Jr. According to evidence presented during trial, Cameron had arranged the meeting shortly before his death. Detectives recovered additional ballistic evidence, and laboratory examination again linked the shooting to the same Glock handgun previously stolen from Salim Richards. The repeated appearance of the same firearm significantly strengthened investigators' working theory that the homicides were connected. Later that same day, another victim, 43-year-old Maria Villanueva, disappeared. Surveillance footage captured portions of her final known movements, including an individual approaching her vehicle. The following day, investigators located her body and determined that she had also been fatally shot. Her vehicle had been taken. Maria Villanueva's case introduced additional forms of evidence into the investigation. Detectives examined surveillance recordings from nearby businesses, collected biological evidence for DNA analysis, and worked to reconstruct her final known movements through digital records and witness interviews. By this point, investigators faced a rapidly expanding and increasingly complex inquiry. Multiple homicide scenes, forensic laboratories, crime analysts, digital evidence specialists, and patrol officers were contributing information. Detectives understood that if one offender was responsible for these crimes, identifying that individual quickly had become a matter of public safety. The investigation reached a critical turning point on December 17. Officers responded to reports of gunfire at an apartment. Upon arrival, they encountered Cleophas Cooksey Jr. outside the residence. He was taken into custody after a brief confrontation. Inside the apartment, officers discovered two deceased individuals, 56-year-old Renee Cooksey, the suspect's mother, and 54-year-old Edward Nunn, his stepfather. The discovery immediately prompted investigators to examine whether the suspect might also be connected to the earlier homicides that had occurred throughout the preceding 3 weeks. Search warrants executed at locations associated with Cooksey produced evidence that investigators considered highly significant. Among the items recovered were the Glock handgun reported stolen from Salim Richards, the keys to Maria Villanueva's vehicle, Richards' gold chain, and additional property linked to victims. These discoveries did not stand alone. Forensic scientists compared bullets recovered from multiple crime scenes with test-fired bullets from the recovered Glock handgun. DNA analysis examined biological evidence collected during the investigation. Detectives analyzed cell phone records and surveillance footage to reconstruct movements during the relevant time period. Viewed individually, each item represented only one piece of evidence. Viewed together, investigators concluded that they formed a coherent evidentiary chain connecting multiple homicide scenes to a single suspect. The investigation would continue for years as prosecutors prepared an extensive case involving numerous forensic experts, law enforcement witnesses, digital evidence, and physical exhibits. Ultimately, the prosecution relied on the cumulative strength of this evidence rather than on any single eyewitness account or confession. One aspect of the case, however, remained unresolved. Although investigators assembled substantial evidence linking the crimes together and identifying the offender, no single, comprehensive motive emerged that explained every killing. Some victims were acquainted with Cooksey, while others appeared to have no known personal relationship with him. Prosecutors argued that several victims were robbed during or after the offenses, but the evidence did not establish one unified motive encompassing all 8 homicides. That unanswered question would remain one of the defining features of the case throughout the subsequent trial and sentencing proceedings. By mid-December 2017, investigators from the Phoenix Police Department had begun recognizing that the homicide cases they were handling could no longer be viewed independently. What initially appeared to be separate investigations were gradually converging through forensic evidence, investigative analysis, and the careful comparison of physical exhibits recovered from multiple crime scenes. Every homicide investigation begins with the same objective: preserve the scene, document every observable detail, and collect evidence before time, weather, or human activity can compromise it. Crime scene investigators photographed each location extensively before any evidence was moved. Measurements were taken, shell casings were marked, biological samples were collected, and every item believed to have potential evidentiary value was catalogued. This methodical process is essential because investigators cannot predict which seemingly insignificant detail may later become central to the case. One of the earliest priorities involved firearms evidence. Whenever cartridge cases or bullets are recovered, they are carefully packaged and transported to forensic laboratories. There, firearms examiners use comparison microscopes to evaluate microscopic markings created when a weapon is fired. These markings, produced by the barrel, firing pin, breech face, and extractor mechanisms, can allow examiners to determine whether evidence recovered from different scenes originated from the same firearm. In the Phoenix investigation, this process proved exceptionally important. Laboratory analysis eventually demonstrated that bullets recovered from multiple homicide scenes had been fired from the same Glock 9mm pistol previously reported stolen from victim Salim Richards. This finding provided investigators with their first strong forensic link connecting crimes that had previously been investigated separately. The recovered firearm would later become one of the prosecution's most significant exhibits. However, ballistic evidence alone could not establish who had fired the weapon. Detectives therefore expanded their investigation in several directions simultaneously. Digital evidence became another critical component. Investigators obtained surveillance recordings from businesses, apartment complexes, parking areas, and nearby roadways wherever available. Modern cities generate enormous quantities of video through security systems installed for commercial and residential purposes. Although many recordings capture only brief moments, even partial images can help investigators reconstruct timelines or identify vehicles moving between locations. Specialists reviewed hours of footage frame by frame. Some recordings established when victims were last seen alive. Others documented vehicle movements. Still others helped investigators eliminate inaccurate witness accounts by providing objective timestamps. Equally important were telecommunications records. Subject to legal authorization, investigators analyzed available phone data to determine communication patterns and approximate movements associated with individuals relevant to the investigation. These records did not answer every question, but they helped detectives compare witness statements with independently verifiable information. Physical evidence recovered from crime scenes also required extensive laboratory examination. DNA specialists analyzed biological material collected from various locations to determine whether individuals had been present at or connected to specific events. Such testing follows strict laboratory protocols designed to minimize contamination and ensure reliable interpretation. During the investigation, DNA evidence ultimately supported other forms of evidence already being assembled by detectives. Meanwhile, investigators continued interviewing witnesses. In many homicide cases, witnesses do not observe the crime itself. Instead, they may remember seeing a vehicle, hearing unusual activity, recognizing someone entering or leaving an area, or recalling conversations that later become significant. Even observations that initially appear unrelated may acquire importance after additional evidence is developed. Detectives therefore conducted repeated interviews as new information emerged. As forensic testing progressed, investigators increasingly believed that the crimes formed part of a single investigation rather than several independent homicides. This realization required substantial coordination among specialized units. Crime analysts assembled comprehensive timelines comparing the dates, times, locations, victim movements, recovered evidence, and laboratory findings. Geographic information systems were used to visualize locations across the Phoenix metropolitan area, allowing investigators to examine possible travel patterns and identify relationships that might not be immediately apparent through written reports alone. Another important development occurred after officers took Cleophas Cooksey Jr. into custody on December 17, 2017. Following the appropriate legal procedures, investigators executed search warrants at locations associated with him. The searches produced evidence that investigators considered highly significant. Among the recovered items was the Glock handgun previously reported stolen from Salim Richards. Investigators also recovered Maria Villanueva's vehicle keys, Richards' gold chain, and additional property identified as belonging to victims connected to the investigation. Each recovered object required careful documentation. Chain of custody procedures ensured that every item could later be presented in court with a complete record demonstrating where it had been recovered, who had handled it, and how it had been examined. Maintaining an unbroken chain of custody is fundamental in criminal investigations because improperly documented evidence may be challenged during trial. Investigators did not rely upon any single discovery. Instead, they compared every category of evidence independently. Firearms examinations were evaluated alongside DNA findings. Digital evidence was compared against witness statements. Recovered property was examined together with laboratory reports and investigative timelines. When considered collectively, these independent sources increasingly pointed toward the same conclusion. One characteristic distinguished this investigation from many other homicide cases. There was no confession establishing responsibility. Instead, prosecutors built their case through the cumulative strength of physical, forensic, and digital evidence. Such investigations often require extraordinary patience. Each laboratory report must be completed according to scientific standards. Every search warrant must satisfy legal requirements. Every witness interview must be documented accurately. Only after these independent components are assembled can investigators confidently present a coherent reconstruction of events. The Phoenix investigation illustrates how modern homicide cases increasingly depend upon multidisciplinary cooperation. Detectives, crime scene specialists, forensic scientists, digital analysts, prosecutors, evidence technicians, and patrol officers all contributed specialized expertise. No single individual solved the case independently. Rather, the investigation advanced through the systematic integration of many separate forms of evidence. As additional laboratory reports were completed, prosecutors began preparing one of the largest homicide cases in Arizona's recent history. The volume of evidence continued to expand. Each new finding strengthened previously established connections. By the time formal charges were fully developed, investigators believed they possessed a comprehensive evidentiary record linking multiple homicide scenes through firearms evidence, DNA analysis, recovered property, surveillance footage, telecommunications records, and witness testimony. These findings would later become the foundation of a lengthy prosecution, during which jurors would be asked to evaluate thousands of pages of reports, extensive forensic testimony, and numerous physical exhibits before reaching their verdicts. By the third week of December 2017, investigators were no longer approaching the recent homicides as isolated events. What had begun as several independent investigations had evolved into a coordinated effort involving homicide detectives, forensic scientists, crime analysts, prosecutors, digital evidence specialists, and patrol officers from multiple jurisdictions. Their task was no longer simply to determine what had happened at individual crime scenes. They now had to establish whether one offender was responsible for multiple killings and, if so, whether the available evidence could withstand the rigorous scrutiny of a criminal trial. The distinction was significant. Law enforcement agencies often recognize investigative patterns before they possess evidence sufficient to support criminal charges. Detectives may suspect that several crimes are connected, but prosecutors must ultimately prove those connections beyond a reasonable doubt. This requires objective evidence rather than intuition or coincidence. At this stage of the investigation, detectives concentrated on organizing information into a comprehensive timeline. Each victim's known movements during the hours preceding their death were reconstructed using witness interviews, surveillance recordings, digital records, and other available investigative resources. Officers compared locations, travel routes, communication histories, and recovered evidence in an effort to identify recurring patterns. Crime analysts played an increasingly important role. Their responsibility was to integrate information collected by different investigative teams and present it in ways that allowed detectives to recognize relationships that might otherwise remain unnoticed. Mapping software, chronological charts, communication records, and evidence inventories were combined into a unified investigative framework. One of the strongest objective links remained the Glock 9mm handgun originally reported missing after the homicide of Salim Richards. Firearms examiners continued comparing bullets and cartridge cases recovered from multiple scenes. Their laboratory analyses indicated that the same weapon had been used repeatedly. This finding did not identify the shooter, but it established a scientifically supported connection among several homicides that had initially appeared unrelated. Detectives then focused on determining where the firearm had gone after Richard's death. That question became increasingly important because tracing possession of the weapon could potentially identify the individual responsible for multiple offenses. The investigation accelerated after officers encountered Cleophas Emmanuel Cooksey Jr. on December 17, 2017, following the fatal shootings of Renee Cooksey and Edward Nunn. Once Cooksey had been taken into custody, investigators sought and obtained judicial authorization to conduct searches associated with the case. These searches were carried out under established legal procedures designed to preserve evidence while protecting constitutional rights. Among the recovered items was the Glock handgun previously reported stolen from Salim Richards. The significance of that discovery extended beyond simple possession of stolen property. Investigators now had an opportunity to compare the recovered firearm directly with evidence collected from multiple homicide scenes. Laboratory testing reinforced earlier ballistic conclusions, further strengthening the evidentiary connections developed during the investigation. Additional property recovered during the searches also drew investigators' attention. Authorities located Maria Villanueva's vehicle keys, Salim Richards' gold chain, and other personal property identified through the investigation. Each recovered item underwent careful documentation, photography, and evidence processing before being entered into official custody. Every transfer of physical evidence was recorded through chain of custody procedures. This documentation serves an essential purpose within the criminal justice system. Courts require prosecutors to demonstrate that evidence presented during trial is the same evidence originally recovered during the investigation and that it has been handled according to accepted forensic standards. Accurate documentation helps ensure both reliability and fairness throughout the legal process. Physical evidence alone was not the only focus. Detectives continued interviewing individuals who had interacted with Cooksey before his arrest. Some interviews sought to clarify timelines. Others addressed possible associations between victims or attempted to verify information obtained through digital evidence. Investigators also examined available surveillance footage from businesses, residential properties, and public areas. Although security cameras rarely provide a complete account of criminal events, they frequently establish important contextual information. Video recordings can confirm the presence of particular vehicles, document approximate times of movement, or support witness statements regarding an individual's location. Digital evidence increasingly complemented traditional investigative methods. Subject to legal authorization, detectives analyzed communication records and other available electronic data to compare movements and contacts relevant to the investigation. These analyses were evaluated alongside physical evidence rather than viewed independently. Modern homicide investigations rarely depend upon a single decisive piece of evidence. Instead, prosecutors seek to assemble multiple independent sources that reinforce one another. In this investigation, ballistics, recovered property, surveillance recordings, DNA evidence, witness testimony, and digital records collectively contributed to the prosecution's theory of the case. One notable aspect of the investigation concerned motive. Throughout the evidence-gathering process, detectives attempted to determine whether the victims shared a single identifiable characteristic that explained why they had been targeted. The results were inconclusive. Some victims had prior contact with Cooksey. Others appeared to have no established personal relationship with him. Several incidents involved the theft of personal property. However, investigators did not identify one comprehensive motive capable of explaining every homicide. This uncertainty remained throughout subsequent court proceedings. Rather than relying upon a unified motive, prosecutors concentrated on demonstrating criminal responsibility through objective evidence connecting Cooksey to each offense individually. That approach reflected an important principle within criminal law. Although motive may help juries understand why a crime occurred, it is generally not required to prove that a defendant committed the offense. The prosecution's burden is to establish the elements of the charged crimes beyond a reasonable doubt using admissible evidence. As laboratory testing continued and investigative reports accumulated, prosecutors began preparing one of the most extensive homicide prosecutions in Arizona in recent years. The amount of evidence required careful organization. Investigators prepared detailed reports describing each crime scene, forensic specialists documented laboratory findings, analysts compiled timelines, and prosecutors reviewed thousands of pages of investigative materials to determine how best to present the case during trial. Defense attorneys likewise examined the evidence, challenged aspects of the prosecution's conclusions where appropriate, and exercised the procedural rights afforded under the American criminal justice system. The lengthy period before trial reflected the complexity of the investigation rather than any single procedural issue. Cases involving multiple homicide counts require extensive pretrial preparation by both parties. Expert witnesses must prepare reports and testimony. Forensic evidence undergoes repeated review. Discovery materials are exchanged between prosecution and defense. Courts consider numerous legal motions before jury selection begins. Throughout this process, investigators remained focused on ensuring that every conclusion presented in court could be supported by reliable evidence. the investigation ultimately demonstrated how advances in forensic science have transformed homicide investigations. Ballistics analysis connected crime scenes. DNA testing supported investigative findings. Digital evidence strengthened reconstructed timelines. Surveillance recordings provided independent visual documentation. Recovered property established additional factual links between victims and the suspect. No single category of evidence answered every question. Together, however, they formed a comprehensive evidentiary framework that prosecutors argued established responsibility for the series of homicides. Even as the investigation moved toward prosecution, one question remained unresolved. Authorities had assembled substantial evidence identifying the person they believed responsible. What they had not fully determined was why the killings occurred. That unanswered question would continue to distinguish the case long after arrests had been made and formal charges had been filed, leaving investigators, prosecutors, surviving family members, and the broader community without a single explanation that accounted for every victim and every event during those 21 days in late 2017. By mid-December 2017, the investigation had reached a critical stage. Detectives had accumulated evidence from multiple homicide scenes, yet many essential questions remained unanswered. Ballistic examinations had already suggested that several of the shootings were connected through the same firearm, but investigators still needed to establish who possessed that weapon and whether sufficient evidence existed to link one individual to the series of crimes. The turning point did not come from a single dramatic discovery. Instead, it resulted from the gradual convergence of independent lines of evidence developed by investigators over several weeks. On December 17, 2017, officers responded to reports of gunfire at an apartment. When they arrived, they encountered Cleophas Emmanuel Cooksey Jr. outside the residence. Officers took him into custody after a brief confrontation. Inside the apartment, investigators found two deceased individuals later identified as Renee Cooksey, his mother, and Edward Nunn, his stepfather. From an investigative perspective, the immediate priority was to secure the scene and preserve evidence. Crime scene specialists documented the apartment, photographed physical evidence, and ensured that all items of potential evidentiary value were collected according to established forensic procedures. At this stage, detectives treated the case as they would any homicide investigation, while also recognizing the possibility that it might intersect with the earlier shootings that had occurred across Phoenix and Glendale. The decision to examine those potential connections proved significant. Following Cooksey's arrest, investigators obtained judicial authorization to search locations associated with him. Search warrants are an essential investigative tool but require legal justification supported by facts presented to a judge. Once approved, investigators conducted systematic searches designed to recover evidence relevant to the ongoing homicide investigations. Among the most important discoveries was the Glock 9mm handgun that had previously been reported stolen from Salim Richards after his death on December 2. The recovery of that firearm represented a major investigative development. Forensic laboratories were now able to perform direct comparison testing using the recovered weapon. Firearms examiners test-fired the handgun and compared the resulting bullets and cartridge cases with evidence collected from multiple homicide scenes. Their analysis reinforced earlier conclusions that the same firearm had been used in several of the killings. This scientific finding strengthened the prosecution's developing theory that the homicides were connected through a common weapon. Investigators also recovered additional items that had evidentiary significance. According to court records, Maria Villanueva's vehicle keys were located during the searches. Detectives also recovered Salim Richards' gold chain along with other property identified as belonging to victims connected to the investigation. Each recovered item required careful examination. Evidence technicians photographed every object before packaging it for laboratory analysis. Investigators documented exactly where each item had been found, who collected it, and every subsequent transfer into forensic custody. Maintaining a complete chain of custody was essential because prosecutors would later need to demonstrate that every exhibit introduced at trial had been preserved according to accepted legal and scientific standards. While physical evidence continued to accumulate, detectives expanded their review of digital evidence. Surveillance recordings collected from businesses and residential areas were analyzed alongside witness interviews and available communication records. Individually, many of these sources offered only limited information. Together, however, they helped investigators construct increasingly detailed timelines of relevant events. Digital evidence often serves an important corroborative role in modern criminal investigations. Rather than replacing eyewitness testimony or forensic science, it provides additional context. Video recordings can confirm that a vehicle traveled through a particular area at a specific time. Telephone records may establish communication between individuals before or after significant events. When considered alongside physical evidence, these sources help investigators test competing theories against objective information. DNA analysis also contributed to the investigation. Forensic specialists examined biological material recovered during the inquiry using established laboratory procedures. According to evidence presented during trial, DNA findings supported other investigative conclusions regarding Cooks's connection to the homicide of Maria Villanueva. Importantly, investigators did not rely on any single category of evidence. The strength of the case developed through the consistency of multiple independent findings. Ballistics linked several crime scenes through the same firearm. Recovered property connected victims to items found after Cooks's arrest. DNA analysis supported additional investigative conclusions. Surveillance footage and digital records helped establish timelines and movements. Witness interviews provided further context that investigators compared against the objective evidence. This cumulative approach is characteristic of complex homicide investigations. Prosecutors generally seek to demonstrate that numerous independent sources all point toward the same conclusion rather than asking jurors to rely upon one decisive piece of evidence alone. As investigators reviewed the growing body of evidence, they also revisited earlier assumptions about the victims. Initially, detectives had explored whether the killings were primarily related to personal disputes, robbery, or illegal drug activity. While some victims appeared to have known Cooksey and others did not, investigators ultimately concluded that no single explanation adequately accounted for every homicide. This lack of a unified motive remained one of the most unusual aspects of the case. In many serial homicide investigations, detectives eventually identify a pattern that helps explain victim selection. In this investigation, however, the available evidence established responsibility more clearly than motive. Prosecutors argued that several victims were robbed during or after the offenses, but they did not present one comprehensive motive encompassing all 8 murders. As the investigation transitioned toward prosecution, detectives began preparing extensive reports summarizing months of investigative work. Each report documented factual findings rather than speculation. Laboratory experts prepared technical analyses describing ballistic comparisons and DNA examinations. Crime scene investigators organized photographic evidence and physical exhibits. Detectives assembled chronological timelines supported by witness interviews, surveillance recordings, and documentary evidence. Prosecutors then evaluated this material to determine how best to present the case before a jury. Preparing a multi-victim homicide prosecution requires substantial coordination. Expert witnesses must be prepared to explain complex forensic findings in language understandable to jurors. Investigative reports must be carefully organized. Evidence must be catalogued so that every exhibit can be introduced in accordance with legal rules governing criminal trials. The defense is likewise entitled to review the evidence, challenge forensic conclusions where appropriate, and present its own arguments regarding the prosecution's case. By the conclusion of the investigative phase, law enforcement officials believed they had assembled a comprehensive evidentiary record. Their case rested not on a confession or a single eyewitness, but on the combined weight of forensic science, recovered property, digital evidence, surveillance recordings, and investigative documentation developed over the course of the inquiry. Although important questions about motive remained unresolved, investigators believed the evidence was sufficient to proceed with prosecution. The next stage would shift the focus from police work to the courtroom, where prosecutors would be required to present that evidence publicly, subject it to adversarial testing, and ask a jury to determine whether it proved Cleophas Emmanuel Cooksey Jr.'s guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Following years of investigation, forensic testing, and extensive pretrial proceedings, the case against Cleophas Emmanuel Cooksey Jr. moved into the courtroom. By the time jury selection began, prosecutors had assembled one of the most complex homicide cases in Arizona in recent years. The prosecution was required to present evidence relating to 8 separate homicide counts, along with additional charges including armed robbery, kidnapping, and attempted sexual assault in connection with specific victims. The length of the pretrial process reflected the complexity of the case. Both the prosecution and the defense reviewed thousands of pages of investigative reports, laboratory findings, witness statements, surveillance recordings, and physical evidence. Multiple expert witnesses were expected to testify regarding firearms identification, DNA analysis, crime scene processing, digital evidence, and other technical subjects. The prosecution's case relied heavily on physical and forensic evidence rather than eyewitness testimony. Central to the prosecution's presentation was the Glock 9mm handgun recovered during the investigation. Firearms experts explained the methodology used to compare bullets and cartridge cases recovered from multiple crime scenes. They testified that microscopic markings observed during laboratory examinations supported the conclusion that several of the shootings involved the same firearm. Jurors also heard testimony concerning items recovered after Cooksey's arrest, including property identified as belonging to victims. Prosecutors argued that these recovered items, considered together with the ballistic evidence and other forensic findings, established a continuous chain linking multiple offenses. DNA evidence formed another important component of the prosecution's case. Forensic specialists described laboratory procedures used to collect, preserve, and analyze biological evidence. They explained how quality assurance measures, documentation requirements, and peer review are incorporated into forensic testing to ensure reliability. According to the evidence presented during trial, DNA findings supported other investigative conclusions regarding Cooksey's connection to Maria Villanueva's homicide. Investigators also introduced digital evidence gathered during the investigation. Surveillance recordings, communication records obtained through legal process, and other documentary evidence were used to reconstruct aspects of the timeline presented to the jury. Rather than relying on any single piece of evidence, prosecutors emphasized how multiple independent sources consistently supported the same overall conclusion. Witness testimony provided additional context. Law enforcement officers described the investigative steps taken following each homicide. Crime scene investigators explained how evidence had been documented and preserved. Laboratory experts interpreted scientific findings for the jury, while detectives summarized how separate investigations gradually converged into one comprehensive case. The defense exercised its role within the adversarial process by challenging aspects of the prosecution's evidence and questioning whether the government's conclusions had been established beyond a reasonable doubt. Defense counsel examined the methods used during the investigation, cross-examined expert witnesses, and argued on behalf of the defendant as required by the principles of the American criminal justice system. Throughout the proceedings, the court reminded jurors that the burden of proof rested entirely with the prosecution. The defendant was presumed innocent unless the evidence established guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, a standard designed to protect the fairness and integrity of criminal trials. One notable feature of the trial was the continuing uncertainty regarding motive. Although prosecutors presented substantial evidence linking Cooksey to the offenses, they did not argue that a single motive explained every homicide. Some victims appeared to have had prior contact with the defendant, while others did not. Several incidents involved robbery, but investigators acknowledged that no single explanation fully accounted for the entire sequence of events. Ultimately, the prosecution argued that motive, while potentially relevant, was not a required element for proving first-degree murder. Instead, jurors were asked to evaluate the physical evidence, forensic findings, digital records, witness testimony, and recovered property presented during trial. After hearing the evidence and receiving legal instructions from the court, the jury began deliberations. The deliberative process required jurors to consider each charge separately, evaluating whether the prosecution had met its burden of proof for every count. In complex criminal cases involving multiple victims, verdicts are reached only after careful review of extensive testimony and documentary evidence. The jury ultimately found Cleophas Emmanuel Cooksey Jr. guilty of 8 counts of first-degree murder, along with numerous additional felony offenses associated with the investigation. The case then proceeded to the penalty phase. Arizona law requires additional proceedings before a death sentence may be imposed. Jurors must consider statutory aggravating and mitigating factors before determining whether capital punishment is appropriate. Following those proceedings, the jury imposed death sentences for 6 of the murder convictions. With respect to the murders of Renee Cooksey and Edward Nunn, however, jurors did not reach unanimous agreement regarding the appropriate sentence. Under Arizona law, that lack of unanimity required those sentencing issues to proceed through separate legal processes. Although the verdict concluded the trial itself, it did not resolve every question surrounding the case. Investigators had succeeded in identifying the offender and presenting evidence sufficient to obtain convictions. The criminal justice system had completed its primary function of determining legal responsibility based on the available evidence. Yet one question remained largely unanswered. Why did these crimes occur? Years after the investigation began, authorities continued to acknowledge that no single motive fully explained the selection of every victim or the rapid succession of killings during those 21 days in late 2017. For investigators, prosecutors, and the families of the victims, that unresolved question remains one of the defining characteristics of the case. The legal proceedings established criminal responsibility, but they could not provide a complete explanation for the underlying reasons behind one of the most significant serial homicide investigations in the modern history of the Phoenix metropolitan area. The conclusion of a criminal trial often marks the end of legal proceedings, but it rarely marks the end of a case's impact. For investigators, prosecutors, defense attorneys, victims' families, and the wider community, the consequences of a major homicide investigation continue long after the verdict has been announced. In the Cooksey case, the jury's findings established criminal responsibility through the legal process. Multiple convictions were returned after jurors considered extensive forensic evidence, witness testimony, digital records, and physical exhibits collected over the course of the investigation. The courtroom answered the legal question of whether the prosecution had proven its case beyond a reasonable doubt. It did not answer every human question. Perhaps the most enduring uncertainty concerns motive. Throughout the investigation and subsequent trial, authorities acknowledged that no single explanation fully accounted for the series of homicides. Some victims had prior contact with Cooksey, while others appeared to have no known personal relationship with him. Several incidents involved robbery, yet robbery alone did not explain every aspect of the case. Investigators examined numerous possibilities, but no comprehensive motive emerged that could satisfactorily explain all 8 killings. This distinction is important. Criminal investigations seek to establish responsibility based on evidence. Understanding motive may assist investigators, but it is not always possible, and it is not always legally necessary. Some cases conclude with convictions while important psychological or personal questions remain unanswered. For the families of the victims, however, unanswered questions can remain deeply significant. Losing a loved one to homicide often involves two separate experiences. The first is the immediate loss itself. The second is the lengthy legal process that follows. Investigations, pretrial hearings, forensic examinations, and court proceedings may continue for years before a final verdict is reached. During that time, families frequently revisit painful events through public testimony, media coverage, and legal proceedings. Victim advocates often describe the courtroom as a place where legal accountability is pursued, but not necessarily emotional closure. Every family responds differently. Some find comfort in knowing that the evidence was carefully examined and that the judicial process reached a conclusion. Others continue to struggle with the absence created by the loss of a parent, child, sibling, spouse, or friend, regardless of the outcome in court. The Cooksey investigation also demonstrated the increasing importance of forensic science in modern criminal justice. Ballistics analysis connected multiple crime scenes through a single firearm. DNA testing supported investigative findings. Surveillance recordings and digital evidence helped reconstruct timelines. Recovered property linked victims to evidence discovered during the investigation. None of these forms of evidence acted independently. Rather, the case illustrated how modern homicide investigations rely on the cumulative strength of multiple scientific and investigative disciplines working together. The investigation further highlighted the value of coordination among law enforcement agencies and forensic specialists. Detectives, crime scene investigators, laboratory personnel, digital evidence analysts, prosecutors, and victim services professionals all contributed to different stages of the case. Complex investigations rarely depend upon one dramatic breakthrough. More often, they advance through systematic documentation, careful analysis, and collaboration across specialized fields. Another aspect that drew public attention was the timeline. The 8 homicides occurred within approximately 21 days. Such a concentrated period of violence placed significant demands on investigators while also increasing concern regarding public safety. The rapid succession of incidents required law enforcement agencies to evaluate whether apparently separate crimes might, in fact, be connected. The eventual identification of those links demonstrated the importance of continually reassessing investigative assumptions as new evidence becomes available. The case has also become a subject of discussion within criminal justice education. Investigators and forensic professionals frequently study complex homicide cases to understand how evidence was collected, how investigative strategies evolved, and how scientific findings were integrated into courtroom presentations. Such reviews are not intended to revisit tragedy for its own sake but to improve future investigative practices and strengthen the reliability of criminal prosecutions. Responsible discussion of cases such as this also raises broader ethical questions about true crime media. Public interest in criminal investigations can encourage greater understanding of forensic science, legal procedure, and victim advocacy. At the same time, there is an ongoing responsibility to avoid reducing victims to plot devices or presenting offenders in ways that overshadow the individuals whose lives were lost. For that reason, many journalists, investigators, and victim advocates emphasize that the focus of responsible reporting should remain on verified facts, accountability through the justice system, and the experiences of those affected by violent crime. The Cooksey case remains one of the most significant serial homicide prosecutions in the modern history of the Phoenix metropolitan area. Its legal outcome established responsibility through the courts. Its forensic evidence demonstrated the capabilities of modern investigative science. Its unresolved questions regarding motive continue to remind investigators that not every aspect of violent crime can be fully explained. Ultimately, the case illustrates two realities that often exist simultaneously in major criminal investigations. The justice system can determine who committed the crimes based on evidence presented in court. It cannot always explain why those crimes occurred. That distinction continues to shape how investigators, legal professionals, researchers, and the public understand this case years after the verdict, ensuring that it is remembered not only for the complexity of its investigation but also for the enduring importance of evidence-based justice and respect for the lives that were lost. The Cooksey investigation has become an example of how contemporary homicide investigations increasingly depend on the integration of multiple forms of evidence, rather than a single decisive discovery. While public attention often focuses on dramatic arrests or courtroom verdicts, investigators generally view cases like this through a different lens. Their primary concern is whether each conclusion can be supported by reliable, independently verifiable evidence. One of the most significant investigative lessons from this case is the importance of preserving every crime scene with the expectation that seemingly unrelated incidents may later become connected. When the first homicides occurred in late November 2017, detectives had no confirmed reason to believe they were investigating the beginning of a broader series. Nevertheless, crime scene specialists followed standard procedures by documenting physical evidence thoroughly, collecting ballistic material, photographing the scene, and maintaining strict chain-of-custody records. Those routine procedures later proved invaluable. Evidence collected days earlier became relevant only after subsequent crimes revealed unexpected forensic connections. The investigation also demonstrated the value of firearms identification. Ballistic examination does not identify a shooter by itself, but it can establish whether multiple bullets or cartridge cases originated from the same weapon. In this investigation, laboratory comparisons involving the Glock 9mm handgun provided one of the earliest objective links between several homicide scenes. Equally important was the careful handling of recovered property. Items associated with victims, including personal belongings recovered during the investigation, were documented according to established evidentiary procedures. Such documentation ensured that prosecutors could later demonstrate where each item had been recovered, how it had been preserved, and how it related to other evidence introduced during trial. Digital evidence represented another important component of the investigation. Modern criminal investigations frequently involve surveillance recordings, communication records obtained through legal process, and electronic data capable of assisting investigators in reconstructing timelines. While digital evidence rarely provides a complete account of criminal events, it often serves as an important source of corroboration when evaluated alongside witness testimony and forensic findings. The Cooksey investigation illustrated this principle. Rather than depending upon a single surveillance recording or a single witness statement, investigators compared multiple independent sources of information. Where one source answered a question, another often confirmed it. This process of corroboration strengthens the reliability of investigative conclusions. DNA analysis further demonstrated the increasing role of forensic science in criminal prosecutions. Advances in laboratory technology have significantly expanded investigators' ability to evaluate biological evidence. However, scientific testing remains effective only when evidence is collected, packaged, transported, and documented according to rigorous professional standards. The investigation also highlighted the importance of multidisciplinary cooperation. Large homicide investigations involve far more than detectives alone. Crime scene investigators preserve evidence. Forensic scientists conduct laboratory analyses. Digital specialists evaluate electronic records. Crime analysts organize timelines and identify investigative patterns. Prosecutors prepare evidence for presentation in court. Victim advocates provide support to surviving family members throughout the legal process. Each discipline contributes specialized expertise that supports the broader investigation. Another lesson concerns investigative flexibility. Early assumptions in criminal investigations are frequently revised as additional evidence becomes available. Initial theories regarding motive or victim relationships may prove incomplete or incorrect. Experienced investigators therefore avoid becoming committed to one explanation before the available evidence justifies it. The Cooksey investigation reflected this approach. What initially appeared to be separate homicide investigations gradually evolved into a unified inquiry as objective forensic evidence established connections among multiple crime scenes. The case also illustrates an important distinction between establishing criminal responsibility and understanding motive. The prosecution presented sufficient evidence for jurors to determine guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. At the same time, investigators acknowledged that no single comprehensive motive explained every homicide. This distinction is not unusual in criminal justice. Courts determine whether evidence establishes legal responsibility. They are not always able to answer every psychological or personal question surrounding a crime. For students of criminal justice and forensic science, the investigation serves as a reminder that successful prosecutions are built upon systematic evidence collection rather than dramatic breakthroughs. Every properly documented photograph, every carefully preserved cartridge case, every accurately recorded interview, and every laboratory report contributes to the integrity of the final case. The investigation further demonstrates the importance of maintaining professional objectivity. Detectives, forensic scientists, and prosecutors must base conclusions on evidence rather than speculation. This commitment protects both the integrity of the investigation and the fairness of subsequent legal proceedings. Ultimately, the Cooksey case remains significant not only because of the number of victims but also because it illustrates how modern investigative methods, scientific analysis, and coordinated law enforcement efforts can transform a collection of apparently unrelated crimes into a coherent evidentiary case capable of withstanding judicial review. Years after the investigation concluded, it continues to be referenced within discussions of homicide investigation, forensic methodology, and evidence-based prosecution, emphasizing that careful documentation, interdisciplinary cooperation, and adherence to scientific standards remain among the most effective tools available to modern law enforcement. Years after the investigation concluded and the trial reached its verdicts, the Cooksey case continues to be discussed within criminal justice, forensic science, and legal communities. Although the criminal proceedings established responsibility through the courts, the case remains notable because of the questions that were answered through evidence and those that were not. One of the defining characteristics of the investigation was the relatively short period during which the homicides occurred. The concentration of multiple killings within approximately 3 weeks required investigators to reassess information continuously as new evidence emerged. What initially appeared to be unrelated incidents eventually became part of a single investigation through the careful application of forensic science and evidence analysis. This progression illustrates an important principle in homicide investigations. Investigative conclusions are expected to evolve as additional information becomes available. Detectives routinely revisit earlier assumptions when objective evidence points in a different direction. Maintaining that flexibility is essential to avoiding investigative bias and ensuring that conclusions remain supported by facts rather than expectations. The Cooksey investigation also demonstrated the increasingly central role of forensic evidence in criminal prosecutions. Advances in firearms identification, DNA analysis, digital evidence recovery, and surveillance technology have transformed how complex homicide investigations are conducted. While witness testimony remains valuable, many contemporary prosecutions rely upon multiple independent forms of scientific and documentary evidence that collectively establish a consistent evidentiary record. Equally important was the coordination required among numerous professional disciplines. The investigation involved patrol officers, homicide detectives, crime scene specialists, forensic laboratory personnel, crime analysts, prosecutors, digital evidence experts, victim advocates, and court personnel. Each group contributed specialized expertise that supported different stages of the case. Such multidisciplinary collaboration has become increasingly common in major criminal investigations, particularly those involving multiple victims or multiple crime scenes. Another aspect frequently discussed by legal scholars concerns the distinction between proving criminal responsibility and explaining motive. In criminal law, prosecutors must establish the legal elements of each charged offense beyond a reasonable doubt. Although evidence concerning motive may assist jurors in understanding the circumstances of a crime, it is generally not a legal requirement for conviction. The Cooksey case illustrates this distinction clearly. The prosecution presented evidence that the jury determined was sufficient to establish responsibility for the charged offenses. At the same time, investigators acknowledged that no single motive fully explained every homicide. This outcome reminds observers that criminal investigations do not always provide complete psychological explanations. Evidence can establish what occurred, who was responsible, and how events unfolded while leaving broader questions about personal motivation unresolved. The case has also contributed to discussions about responsible public communication regarding violent crime. Investigators, prosecutors, journalists, and victim advocates increasingly emphasize the importance of presenting factual information without unnecessary speculation. Accurate reporting serves both public understanding and the integrity of ongoing investigations. Speculation regarding unverified motives or unsupported theories can complicate investigative efforts and contribute to public misunderstanding. For this reason, official statements throughout the investigation generally focused on evidence that had been verified rather than assumptions that remained under examination. The experiences of victims' families likewise remain an important consideration. Major criminal investigations often continue for years before final legal resolution. During that period, surviving relatives may attend hearings, review evidence presented in court, and revisit painful events repeatedly throughout the judicial process. Victim advocacy organizations frequently emphasize that legal accountability, while important, does not eliminate the long-term emotional consequences experienced by families affected by violent crime. Court proceedings answer legal questions, they do not erase personal loss. The Cooksey investigation has also been examined as an example of how physical evidence recovered during one investigation may later become essential in another. The recovery and preservation of the Glock handgun, victim property, biological evidence, surveillance recordings, and digital records each became more significant as investigators established additional connections among separate crime scenes. This cumulative development underscores another important investigative principle: evidence should be collected comprehensively even when its immediate significance is uncertain. Modern forensic science often reveals connections that cannot be recognized during the earliest stages of an investigation. The case further demonstrates the importance of maintaining detailed investigative documentation. Every crime scene report, laboratory analysis, interview summary, and evidence log contributed to the prosecution's ability to present a coherent account during trial. Complex criminal cases depend upon accurate documentation not only for investigative purposes but also to ensure transparency throughout judicial proceedings. Legal scholars also note that cases involving multiple homicide counts frequently require extended pre-trial preparation. Large volumes of evidence must be reviewed by both prosecution and defense. Expert witnesses prepare detailed reports. Courts resolve procedural motions before trial begins. Although these processes require considerable time, they are intended to protect the fairness and reliability of criminal proceedings. Ultimately, the Cooksey case remains significant because it illustrates both the strengths and the limitations of the criminal justice system. Through coordinated investigation, forensic science, and judicial review, authorities were able to identify the individual they believed responsible and present evidence that resulted in multiple convictions. At the same time, the investigation serves as a reminder that not every question surrounding violent crime can be answered conclusively. The justice system can establish legal responsibility. Scientific evidence can reconstruct events with increasing precision. Yet some aspects of human behavior, including the complete motivations behind certain crimes, may remain uncertain even after years of investigation. For that reason, the lasting significance of the case lies not only in its legal outcome but also in the continued emphasis it places on careful evidence collection, objective investigation, respect for victims, and the ongoing pursuit of truth through the rule of law.